Before we jump into this episode, just a quick update for the podcasting community in academia and higher education. This year, Higher Ed PodCon has expanded to 2 full days of sessions, conversations, and discussions entirely focused on podcasting in higher education. We've just announced all of our keynote speakers. Those are on the website. You can check them out. And also, I want to let you know for the first time, we are launching the Higher Ed Podcast Awards to recognize some of the best in podcasting happening across universities. So if you're producing a podcast at a university or working with faculty or research teams, we'd love to see you submit your show. And if you have colleagues on campus that are working in this podcasting space, please pass along the word and encourage them to enter as well. We've worked really hard to keep the cost of attending PodCon as reasonable as possible. So I just want to let you know that registration even includes breakfast and lunch both days. And we've negotiated some really good deals for hotel rates nearby. So you can learn more and submit your podcast for the awards and register at higheredpodcon.com. Thanks. Hope to see you there.
When OCW started out, the assumption was that it would be mainly valuable to other educators, that they would be the main audience. And a really great surprise was that no, like most of the people who use it are just lifelong learners all over the world. I'm really proud of the fact that we have served both audiences. You have really interested educators who are going to watch those shorter topics about teaching, but then you also have this huge casual audience like me. You know, we have this saying within OCW, Brett gets it, because there's not a lot of things I get, right? Like I don't come from an academic background, and we want those people too. We want the people like me who find something on our channel. And then when we started the podcast, we worked with this great producer who really helped us think about the important questions. And I think he was really crucial in saying, like, you still need to think about what are you bringing to the table? Who's your audience specifically? Like have a thesis, right? You're not just like, oh, we're talking to this wonderful professor, but like, what are you going to talk about? What's intriguing about that person and their work?
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters who want to learn, connect, and get inspired. I'm Neil McFedrin, founder of higheredpods.com and Podium Podcast Company.
And I'm Jennifer Lee Gunson, founder of JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting. If you're podcasting in higher ed, you're not alone. There's a fast-growing community out there, and we're here to help you tap into it.
That's right, Jen. Speaking of community, we're just going to do a little thing here called Where in the World is Jen and Neil, because we are going to be at a bunch of conferences over the next few months, and we'd love to see you in person. So, Jen, in May, you're going to be in London at
The Podcast Show.
And what are those dates?
The 20th to the 21st.
Great. But you're actually in London for a few more days. So
I am. And I'm going to hopefully find a lot of our UK friends and meet up with them, the people that we've been talking to in the last few years on continuing studies.
Our contact details are in the show notes. So reach out to Jen and reach out to me. I'm in the UK as well the next month in June at ePod in Leeds. I'm super excited about that. I'm actually going to be presenting my abstract.
You're sneaky.
And I've started working on my paper, but I got, 6 or 7 weeks? So I better get moving here because I'm being a classic student here and I need to get moving on my paper. And in July, Jen, we are both at Higher Ed PodCon in Cleveland. And actually, we're going to be recording live episodes while we're there. There's a really cool podcast studio there that we're going to be making full use of. So if you're going and you want to be on continuing studies, now is your chance to get in a studio with us and do it live. We're really excited about that. Okay, so Jen, we got lots of travel ahead of us. I'm really excited, and reach out to us. We'll put all those links in the show notes. We want to hear from you. So Jen, in this episode, we're talking with Brett Paci, and he is MIT OpenCourseWare's Assistant Director of Media Production and the co-creator and producer of the Chalk Radio podcast. It's been around for 8 years, so lots of insights there. And he has worked at MIT OpenCourseWare since shortly after it launched 20 years ago. So lots of really interesting insights about how they've used multimedia and podcasting. And in recent years, he has led the remarkable growth of the initiative's YouTube presence to over 6 million subscribers, which is quite amazing.
One day we can strive to that 6 million subscribers.
That's great. Okay, so this episode, we've got just chocked full of insights here for you. Pun intended. So let's jump into it.
Let's go.
Brett, so great to have you here on this episode of Continuing Studies.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
So maybe before we get into the world of podcasting, which we're going to get deep into today, let's start with what is MIT Open Learning?
Yeah, so start sort of the other way around, right? So OpenCourseWare came first, and now OpenCourseWare is part of sort of an umbrella organization called Open Learning, which is really about all sorts of online educational offerings from MIT, some of which are free, like OpenCourseWare, other things that are paid offerings like MIT X Pro, which has a more specific focus, I guess, in certain fields and industry. So we're all sort of under the same roof. So OpenCourseWare, if you go back 25 years, it was a time like around 1999, 2000, when I guess you could say everybody kind of figured out how this new internet thing worked. And so the next logical step is like, how do we make bank, right? Like, how do we profit off of whatever it is that we do in this new online space? So, MIT was no different, trying to figure out what do we do with this? And while a lot of other places decided we're going to try to offer courses online and people can pay a lot of times a reasonable amount, just for a certificate or something, or maybe something even more. But MIT kind of made a radical move and decided to just give everything away for free. So of course, it was a pretty big deal at the time. It was announced in the New York Times. And it's really great, to work in a place like this, knowing that that's your mission. Over the years, I can't count the number of times, people will ask me what I do. And then the follow-up question is like, wait, what's the catch? Like MIT's giving away all of their educational materials for free online and there's no strings attached. And the answer is yes, that is what's happening here. So that's the origin, and we're going strong to this day. And the Institute seems committed to carrying this forward for another 25 years.
That's great. So let's now jump into Chalk Radio. So what is Chalk Radio and how did that come together? And how does that fit into this world of open learning as well?
Yeah, it's great questions because it kind of goes back in the early years. At the very beginning, video wasn't really a part. So I guess it's kind of interesting, right? That video is kind of what led us to podcasting. But video wasn't a part of things at the beginning. Over time, we'd find out, this, extraordinary math professor Gil Strang had his lectures filmed back in 1999. Let's put those on the website. And so those moments would happen. And of course, people reacted really well. It's like I'm sitting in a classroom at MIT learning from these amazing instructors. And so, once YouTube came around, which, yes, we predate YouTube, right? We started a channel, didn't really put much on it right away. But, over the following couple of years, we started adding more and more. And that has just exploded, right? So then you have YouTube really becoming a huge part of what we do, just kind of jumping back to the present. You
guys have a really big channel.
I think we're over 6.2 million subscribers now or something like that. And it's fascinating because, we have the website proper, right? OpenCourseWare, right. ocw.mit.edu. And they've had about the same impact, although YouTube has done it over a much shorter time, right?
Huh.
So the numbers are very similar, of people using the actual website. And then so one of the things that happened later was we decided that we saw a need to not just share what MIT faculty are teaching, but also share the methodology, why they teach the way they do, what are the techniques they use. Other educators use our site a lot. Maybe they want to know, how do you decide how much to cover in a course, right? And so they'll sort of look to OCW to figure out how much should I tackle where I'm teaching, whether it's a community college or even high school teachers will sometimes use like intro stuff that might be relevant to them. So we hired Sarah Hansen, who's the host and co-producer of Chalk Radio. Her role was really to do what I just mentioned, share more about how people teach at MIT and not just what they teach. And so an evolution of that was she was interviewing faculty, transcribing those interviews into text-based pages on the website, talking about how they run their class. And then at a certain point said, these are like really great conversations I'm having. Maybe we should film some of these. So we started filming some of the interviews. They were usually we'd usually break them up into short videos.
You guys were early into the shorts.
I don't know if we knew it at the time, but the format just kind of fit.
Yeah, totally.
And then what happened was, we realized like these are actually great full-length conversations. A lot of the time they were, right? When the faculty had the time to give us. And so we said, maybe we should start a podcast because this is where people consume, maybe hour-long conversations. And we don't have to leave anything on the cutting room floor necessarily. even though we do. But so that seemed like the next, logical step. And that's how Chalk Radio came about.
I just want to say that I think a lot of times in podcasting, there's such a misconception that, oh, you're going to start a podcast and you're going to have like tons of followers and things like that. But I want to talk about the fact that you guys had the YouTube channel before. You're kind of OGs. A lot of people don't realize the people that are successful in podcasting are people that have built a base up prior. So it might have not been a direct podcast, but it took you guys a while. And I just think a lot of people think a lot of podcasts are more overnight success, but they don't realize you've actually been building this. It might have not been Chalk Radio at the moment, but you've been laying the seeds for it.
The OCW following, you're right, we had 17 or 18 years under our belts before we even considered podcasting. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to put it in some form in front of that big following that we had on YouTube already, which might have been, 3 or 4 million at the time.
Yeah, so, not small.
Not small. Right. We have quite an unfair advantage over a lot of other podcasts starting out.
Not unfair. You did the work. That was my point of that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. It took you time, right?
Yeah. And plus the MIT name, right? And so that's what's so big on YouTube. If somebody's looking for, linear algebra, and then
you come to a page of results from Googling that, and one of those results is MIT. You're like, oh, they must know. I just want to jump back a bit into the video thing. I think what's really interesting about what you said, and we've talked a bunch on this show about and this long form piece of content that then we spin out shorts and whatnot for. And we originally sort of looked at those as those were discovery mechanisms to drive you back to the long form piece of content. And really how we look at it is more, it's the sum of the parts. There's an audience that are just going to consume those short form bits, if you will, but they're still part of your audience. And you guys came at it the other way around, which I think is super interesting. The rest of the podcast world right now is grappling with doing the long form, need the shorts. What do we do with the shorts? You guys started there and you went, hey, we could do long form.
Right. Yeah. And to tell you the truth, those short form ones, I wouldn't say they were super popular either, even on our YouTube channel, even with all the users. But what I think is really a credit to our organization, the original mandate going back to 2001 was really to cover the entire curriculum. And of course, there's an asterisk of like, there are things that cannot be turned into a website, right? There's a lot of very like student discussion heavy courses at MIT that you're not going to film because, you're protecting the students. But generally it was to cover the entire curriculum, not just the stuff that, does gangbusters online or on YouTube, right? So people are always drawn to the computer science, to finance, those are some of the biggest ones, to math. But the mission is to cover everything. So when it came to those initial shorter segments of these interviews with faculty talking about specific teaching concepts, they weren't super popular, but we still valued them a lot because the people that were watching them were other educators, which is interesting. When OCW started out, the assumption was that it would be mainly valuable to other educators, that they would be the main audience. And as it turned out, a really great surprise was that no, like most of the people who use it are just lifelong learners all over the world. I'm really proud of the fact that we have served both audiences. So yeah, it really runs the gamut of like, you have really interested educators who are going to watch those shorter topics about teaching, but then you also have this huge casual audience like me. We have this saying within OCW, Brett gets it, because there's not a lot of things I get, right? Like I don't come from an academic background. So we want those people too. We want the people like me who find something on our channel. And it's happened to me a lot of times. My favorite example, John Gruber, economics professor at MIT, who is on one of our recent Chalk Radio episodes, he teaches Intro to Microeconomics. And he talks about how so many people he meets tell him like, oh, I hated that class in college. And he says it's because it's taught really poorly. And then when I watch his videos, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. He's relating it to things that we all deal with every day, to the supermarket, to, Ticketmaster. And so he's making it accessible. And hopefully there are people who are going to pursue that however far they want to go with it. But we did sort of start shorter form. Then I guess when we started the podcast, right, we also have evolved from short form to longer form. Our first stage of Chalk Radio was not super short, but it was not very long. So we started out, as like more of a narrative-based podcast, like an NPR type thing, right? Where we worked with this great producer, Dave Lashansky, who really helped us, think about the important questions And Jen, you mentioned earlier how, a lot of people will start a podcast and they think, oh, this is going to be great. Everybody's going to love it because, I'm talking. Who wouldn't want to hear that? And I think he was really crucial, in saying like, no. Just because it's MIT, just because these are MIT faculty, you still need to think about what are you bringing to the table? Who's your audience specifically? Like have a thesis, right? You're not just like, oh, we're talking to this wonderful professor, but like, what are you going to talk about? What's intriguing about that person and their work? And so we would do the interview. Then we would send it off to Dave, our producer, who fortunately did all the editing too and all the scripting. Yeah, we would record, Sarah would do the voiceover and we'd send it back and we'd get this sort of pretty much finished episode back.
That's a lot of work to do that. And you've evolved since then, right?
Yeah. Boy, that's interesting. I haven't thought for a little while now about why we started to transition more away from that. It is way more work. And so what we're seeing now, even with some of our colleagues who are starting up podcasts, is that they're shying away from that because it's so much work. But I also think that's sort of how things have shifted anyways. I still enjoy listening to Radio Lab and these like sort of heavily produced and engineered podcasts, right? But I think what we're finding now is that you kind of have to be okay with how people want to consume things, right? Like
good insight, yeah.
When you heavily produce something, if there's a lot of narration and it's very carefully planned, and especially something like Radio Lab, you feel like if I space out for 2 seconds, I'm going to be lost. And so you kind of know it's going to demand more of your attention. And I find myself, even as a consumer, sometimes I'll kind of avoid those or I'll put them off because I think, well, I don't really have time to dedicate to focus. I need to listen to something when I'm walking or I'm doing laundry or whatever, and I need to be able to check out, right? And so one of the interesting things that we're dealing with now is like, where do we want to be, right? Do we want to be something that demands people's attention? Hopefully we're really engaging and helping people keep interest as the podcast goes along. But should we also be okay with this idea of like in a long form conversation, it's just more free flowing? And it's okay if people want to check out from time to time, because frankly, my thinking now is that they're probably more likely to check it out if they feel like it doesn't demand their constant attention.
I think it depends on the audience, because I think with podcasting, any type of media, there is different areas for everyone. So we can't all be one thing. We need variety. So it's like if everyone goes to interview format, which Neil knows is my biggest pet peeve.
That's what we are.
But we're doing it right. But
good.
That's right.
And I just find not everyone can do an interview podcast, but everybody wants to do it because everyone turns on the podcast and they're like, oh, well, I got to have an interview podcast. And it's like, no, sometimes you should just be a solo podcast, or you should be a co-hosted podcast, or you be a Q&A podcast. But like, that's why I loved when you were talking about the short clips, because again, I'm going to bring up my favorite word. When I was in broadcasting school, this is what you learn in radio. You learn to put your information that you have. It's a great exercise for everyone. And information that you have into 30 seconds or into 60 seconds. And you got to get in and you got to get out. And you have to give the listener a through line through the whole time. And you got to be engaging. Once you hone in that 30 seconds, then you're able to expand it to 30 and 45 minutes.
I think where so many people go wrong is like everybody's casting themselves, right? Whereas, on a Hollywood movie, the director's going to figure out who actually works on camera. And with podcasts, everybody's deciding that they sound great on mic and that they know how to carry out an engaging interview, which, as we know, with the number of podcasts out there, the odds are very low that somebody's actually going to be really good at it.
Except if you're Neil and I.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love how you were talking about we just want to cast ourselves and maybe we're not great at it. Another thing, though, that I find, of course, is such ongoing debate is audio versus video. And my thing is some people are better on audio and maybe they shouldn't start with video. Maybe they'll get there and eventually they can add on video, but that's a whole other beast. You guys went from video to audio, back to video. What made you return back?
Yeah. So it's weird, right? Just so I don't confuse the listeners. I mentioned before that we always put the podcast on YouTube, but what they were, the majority of our backlog of episodes are on YouTube as a cassette tape. So you don't see Sarah interviewing the guest. You just see this awesome animation by my colleague, Jason Player, who works with us at OpenCourseWare. But we did that because we just figured, people aren't super interested in just watching a cassette tape roll, but it was some people will listen, right? And it's exposure on this big YouTube channel to hopefully get people to subscribe to the podcast. The interesting thing we've learned about our YouTube channel is the traffic and the engagement doesn't necessarily correlate to the quality. So you can make something really great. We've made some really great videos that were, produced as short videos, and they're fantastic, and they're not getting 100,000 views. That's generally just the stuff I mentioned before, like an intro to deep learning will get hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of views, things like that. So Chalk Radio, the podcast, as a cassette tape animation on YouTube, wasn't doing like huge numbers either. And so that was really part of the reason for doing it. But the real reason was that I have the best job because I'm just a producer. I get to sit in the room and watch these interviews happen. I'm never the one on microphone, even though I am today. So I'm hearing Sarah interview these really fascinating MIT faculty members, and there are these wonderful moments happening. I can remember the specific episode. If you go not too far back in our library, a few years, there's an interview with Ann White, who talks a lot about nuclear energy. And there were these delightful, very human moments happening. I remember she was like quizzing Sarah, do you know what the cleanest form of energy is? And Sarah kept getting them wrong. And the more it happened, the more they both laughed. And I just thought, like, man, it's really sad that no one's seeing this because I'm the only person on earth that saw it. So that was really the impetus for me. And we will have those moments for social media. So, the current, my job description and title has evolved over the years too. And, now it includes video engagement and strategy. And so it's like, we think we have a great show, but how do you get people out there to know that you have a great show? And the easiest, most effective way to do it is if you can share those short little video clips of the episode of some really, really interesting or educational or entertaining moment that happens, during the course of the interview. And so that's kind of how we did it. What I love about my boss, Kurt Newton, the director of OpenCourseWare, although I also have another boss now, that's another story, is for me.
Next podcast episode.
Yeah, next episode. Because that's how open learning is evolving. So, but to me, this was a no-brainer, right? So Sarah and I are on the same page with this. We go to our director and say, hey, like, this is a no-brainer. If we film these things and put an actual video on our channel, with two people's faces on camera, like that's obviously going to do better numbers and be more engaging than just watching the beautiful cassette tape spin.
Right.
And he said, to my surprise, well, we don't know that for sure. And I was like, wow, you're right. We actually don't know. It's a really good hunch, but we actually don't know for sure. So he said, let's call it a pilot. And I think that was also a fantastic decision because that gave me and Sarah this sort of freedom to feel like we can try things. So the thing that we did on the first two episodes was we had the first one with this amazing longtime OCW legend, Professor Andrew Lowe, who teaches finance and also with like an AI and healthcare slant. And he was terrific. And so we did that. The setup was a little more formal. We had him and Sarah sitting in nice chairs, kind of across from each other. It almost felt like, Andrew Lowe live, like on stage with Sarah Hansen.
It was kind of like the classic YouTube podcaster set kind of a thing.
Yeah, right. And in a slightly more formal way. And then for the next episode, which we recorded a day later, because we said we'll do two of these. It was with a completely different type of guest, the magnificent Annabelle, who teaches computer science. She teaches like an intro Python programming course that's extremely popular on our YouTube channel. And we said, let's have a little more fun with it. We also knew her. I knew her. We've had a lot of interactions from filming her course over the years. So we had a little bit more of a comfort level just from knowing the person to where we could say, let's have a little more fun with this. Let's try something different. And since it was a pilot, we didn't get picked up for an entire season, as they say in Hollywood, right? It was just do 2 episodes. So we changed the format. We put them at a table, that sort of typical YouTube style show with the actual podcast mics showing up on camera.
Right.
And so that was a lot different. So I love the fact that we got to experiment with that. Now, going back to, was it a no-brainer? It did work extremely well. The stats on YouTube were really good.
So you saw a discernible difference between the ones with the cassette tape versus these newer ones that you've put up that have the full video.
Yes. And, I could throw out something that sounds really amazing, which is like the first episode, something like 20 times more traffic than a standard cassette tape episode. But what we've also found is there are so many factors that determine the success of it, right? And some of it is the guest, some of it is their field, and then some of it is sort of just like this screwy YouTube algorithm that is extremely unpredictable. We've learned a lot in this experience over the past 5 or 6 years of doing Chalk Radio, and in all of the other videos that we put on our YouTube channel, full lectures and other things. And so I feel like the place we're at now is like, we know where to cast the net, right? So you film a full episode with this person, you know they're really interesting, you know they're great, you know the topic is interesting, but sometimes the full episode, the numbers aren't very good. So Jen, to what you mentioned earlier, we also do the shorts, right? You were dead on when you said we kind of have to do all of it. You know, so you have the full length episode, then we will take some segments from it that we think are interesting. So with Andrew Lowe, you know, it was, should AI plan my retirement for me, right? With Annabelle, it was, do you still need to learn how to program if AI can do that for you? And what was interesting about the 2 episodes, and this is where I'm going with this, is like the first one, full episode had huge numbers. Some of the clips did pretty good. The second episode, full episode, did not have huge numbers. It had better numbers than when we didn't actually film it, but they weren't like outstanding. But then that particular clip, which was maybe 4 or 5 minutes long, did huge numbers as well. Sort of like more on the scale that the other full episode did. So I think for us, we've learned a lot from it. We'll cast that net. We'll do this full thing, and then we'll just kind of share it out in different forms on social media, in YouTube shorts. And then we'll just kind of see certain things click with people. And we're just glad, you know, people are getting value out of it. Now, I will say too, I think the thing that people assume happens and doesn't necessarily is sort of like the throughput of, if you have a YouTube short and people like it, they're going to go back to your channel and subscribe. So I think there's a lot of dicey things to learn there. You know, there's things that YouTube wants us to do, which is like make shorts. But you kind of have to figure out which things do they want us to do because it serves them and keeps people on YouTube, and which ones are really beneficial for our channel, for our content.
That's a really good insight. I also really liked the way you guys approached the video as a pilot. And as you said, it gave you a bit of freedom to try different things. Don't get hung up on the one thing and treat it as a pilot. That's a great way to approach it, especially if you're like all of a sudden you got to build out some studio and spend a whole bunch of money on a set.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
maybe a better way to do it is try different ways and figure out what it is before you start to build a set.
Yeah, and I should add, we did kind of build a set. I mean, we did this in a very like extremely low budget. For a lot of people, it can be a very expensive endeavor. For us, we're just fortunate, you know, there's a studio right nearby MIT, Giro Studio, who are fantastic to work with. And they kind of gave me, like, picture a little kid on the floor in their bedroom, like laying on the floor and coloring, and their legs kind of kicking around in the air. That was me in their studio. We have this amazing relationship where they're just like, yeah, you know, screw around in the studio, like put together a set. You know, we put together this set of fake chalkboards, which is also really funny. You know, I had been walking around MIT trying to find discarded chalkboards and then realizing like, oh man, these things weigh like 1 billion pounds. And this colleague, Jim Kane, an engineer, of course, was like, you know, what about foam core? And we're like, wait, what? And then I was like, yeah, I guess that could work. And shockingly, like chalk shows up really well on foam core and it looks like a real chalkboard. So,
cool.
So anyway, this is how, you know, a lot of these kind of fortuitous things happened that we could actually do this in a very, very cost-effective way. But it's something we're actually still grappling with now because it's not really replicable. It's not sustainable going forward. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, we always think like everybody wants creative freedom. And if I think something's a good idea, I just want to be able to do it. And a lot of times having somebody say, well, hold up there, let's treat it as a pilot. And then that actually opened up more creative possibilities.
Yeah, that's great. Also, I think the outside we think, oh, it's MIT. They've got this giant endowment and all this money. You spent a few $100s to try to get you going. But still, you went at it from a pilot perspective with trying different things, and you didn't spend some big, huge amount of money.
Yeah, we try to be fiscally responsible, I guess is the word, right? And it is challenging to explain to people why we, you know, on our website, we ask for donations, right? And people kind of say the same thing, but MIT has all the money in the world. MIT, the institution, covers the majority of our operating budget. which is really fascinating. Again, going back to the beginning, this is why people say, wait, MIT really does that? It's a shameless plug. We recently produced a documentary about the story of OCW for our 25th anniversary. And there's an interview of an OCW user from Uganda who found OpenCourseWare. And I love the way he describes it. He said, I found these lectures on YouTube and I thought, this can't be the MIT. Like, why would they do that, right? When you're giving something away for free, you can't just spend money carelessly, I guess.
That's good. Well, I think that's a good spot to end this wonderful conversation. There is so many incredible nuggets in here for your fellow higher education podcasters. Thanks so much, Brett. Glad to have you here.
Thank you both.
So many great insights, as usual. The one thing that I really like, and we kind of get into this a bit, is the fact that he started with short form content. And for me, learning in broadcasting, that's how we really structure everything, was to really make sure you know how to get into something and get out and keep it engaging. So I love the fact that that's how they started. And then they were able to build longer content on there that was engaging for their audience. So we don't talk too much about structure on this podcast. And I really like the fact that they were really starting with structure and they were able to elongate it eventually after learning the nuts and bolts of what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting insight, Jen, because we've kind of come at it the other way, right? So it's over the last couple of years, it's focusing more on creating short form content out of the long form content. The other part that struck me was how they deliberately approached it as a pilot. And it gave them this freedom, I think, to honestly test different things. And instead of the decision being, yep, this is what we're doing, and that's the way it is, they had a hypothesis that it was going to be super successful, but they were willing to walk it back if it wasn't. And they were really, truly looking at the numbers. So I think that's really good. It's more forgiving. You can test your way into it. I really like that.
And I think right now with this whole, you have to do video, I like the fact that they didn't feel pressured and they were able to cut the noise out.
Oh yeah, really good. Well, another great episode. And why don't you read us out?
Thank you for tuning into the Continuing Studies Podcast, a podcast for higher education podcasters. We hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed the show, we encourage you to follow and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform so you'll never miss an episode. But if you found this episode particularly valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues who also might be interested in higher education podcasts. We also invite you to join your peers on higheredpods.com, where you can connect with other podcasters in higher education and learn from others in the field. Thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights and conversations around higher education podcasts. See you in the next episode.